I never thought living in a quiet, suburban neighborhood could turn into a nightmare. It started with a few petty complaints from the HOA president. My grass too tall, my fence the wrong color. Typical stuff. But then, she crossed a line I could never forgive. One morning, my dog collapsed on the porch, foaming at the mouth. The vet said it looked like poison. And that's when I found something buried near my fence. Something that proved this wasn't an accident. From that moment on, I knew she'd gone too far. But what she didn't know was that I was about to turn the tables. When my wife and I first moved into Maplewood Estates, it felt like we'd finally found the perfect place to settle down. Quiet streets lined with oak trees, kids riding bikes after school, and neighbors who waved as you passed by. It was the kind of neighborhood you see in brochures, where lawns were perfectly trimmed and every mailbox matched. We'd saved for years to buy our little corner lot, complete with a small backyard where our golden retriever, Max, could run free. For the first few months, life felt peaceful. The HOA sent welcome letters, the community held barbecues, and everyone seemed genuinely friendly. Or at least, that's what we thought. But behind those polite smiles were rules that went far beyond maintaining appearances. Rules about fence height, garden decorations, even what color you could paint your front door. At first, I brushed it off as typical HOA stuff, until I noticed the woman who lived across the street. Karen, the HOA president, watching our yard like it was her personal mission. She'd jot things down in her little notebook whenever Max barked, or when I forgot to pull the trash bins in on time. It didn't seem like a big deal, not then. But there was something in the way she smiled. Too tight, too polite. That told me she enjoyed being in control. And little did I know, her obsession with order would soon turn into something darker. Something that would threaten everything I loved about this place. And everyone I loved in it. At first, the tension came quietly. Small, almost laughable annoyances that I thought would pass. A warning notice for leaving my trash bins out too long. A letter citing excessive barking from Max, even though he barely barked except when someone passed the gate. I laughed it off, paid the tiny fine, and tried to be a good neighbor. But then, the notices started piling up. Karen began sending violation photos to the HOA group chat, snapshots of my driveway, my lawn, even my mailbox, as if she spent her days waiting for me to slip up. It became clear this wasn't about rules anymore, it was personal. She'd started leaving notes taped to my door, each one colder and more aggressive than the last. Keep your property compliant. Noise complaints are being documented. The HOA will not tolerate negligence. I tried talking to her, calmly at first, but she brushed me off with a smirk and a clipboard. Then came the fines. Ridiculous, made-up fees for things like unapproved pet activity and unauthorized lawn modifications. I realized she was targeting Max. She'd glare at him from across the street, like he was some kind of menace. I remember one morning vividly. I was taking Max for a walk when I noticed Karen standing near my mailbox, camera in hand, pretending to measure my grass. I asked what she was doing, and she said in that syrupy tone, "Just ensuring compliance." Some people don't take community standards seriously. It was the first time I felt anger boiling beneath my composure. I started documenting everything, taking pictures of her trespassing, logging every fine, every email. I thought maybe if I gathered enough proof, the HOA board would see reason. But that's when I learned the truth. The board was just Karen and two of her friends from down the street. Any complaint against her got reviewed by the same people who benefited from her authority. The next few weeks felt like walking through a minefield. I came home to find anonymous notes in my mailbox. Control your dog. Some people don't belong here. The final straw came when I discovered a motion had been filed to remove my non-compliant fence. The same fence that was approved before we moved in. When I attended the meeting to dispute it, Karen stood there in front of everyone, reciting fake infractions, with that same cold confidence. No one dared to speak up. It felt like the entire neighborhood had been hypnotized by her authority. Max became more anxious, barking whenever she was nearby, as if he could sense something I couldn't. Then one afternoon, I found something strange tossed into my yard. Small chunks of raw meat near the gate. At first, I thought it was some animal, until I saw the faint blue powder dusted on the surface. Rat poison. My stomach dropped. I grabbed Max and rushed him to the vet. He was shaking, his breathing shallow. The vet said he'd ingested just enough to make him sick. But if I hadn't found him when I did, it could have been fatal. That night, I sat in my car, parked across the street, watching Karen's porch light flicker through the blinds. I wanted to call the police, but what would I say? That the HOA president was poisoning my dog. Without proof, it would sound insane. Still, I knew it was her. No one else had reason to hate Max. I started watching more closely. I installed cameras around the yard. Small, hidden, motion activated. Days went by, and nothing happened. Then, one morning just before dawn, I got an alert on my phone. Movement near the gate. The footage showed a figure creeping across the lawn with a flashlight. Small frame, familiar posture, clutching a plastic bag. Karen. She bent down near the fence, scattering something on the ground, then looked around before slipping back across the street. My hands shook as I watched. She wasn't just enforcing rules anymore. She was trespassing, endangering my family. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I acted normal, greeted her like nothing happened. She smiled, that same tight smile, as if daring me to challenge her. But I had a plan. I spent the next few days setting up what I called my insurance. I cleaned up the yard, removed the cameras, made it seem like I'd backed off. Meanwhile, I replaced the dirt near the fence with fresh soil mixed with flour, so I could see footprints. I also set up a secondary camera hidden inside a fake birdhouse, angled perfectly at the fence line. I even left an empty dog bowl near the gate to lure her back. It felt like baiting a trap. And sure enough, a few nights later, she took it. Another alert. The same figure sneaking across my yard, crouching near the bowl. I could see the faint glint of a baggie in her hand. I waited until she left, then checked the footage. Clear as day. Karen, caught in the act. I couldn't believe it. The next morning, I took the video straight to the police. They said they'd investigate, but warned me that without lab tests or direct evidence of poison, it might not go anywhere. Still, they agreed to visit her home for questioning. That's when everything started unraveling. Karen must have realized she'd been caught, because she went on the offensive. She started calling emergency HOA meetings, accusing me of harassment and unlawful surveillance. Flyers showed up around the neighborhood claiming I was endangering the community. It was surreal. Somehow she was flipping the story, painting herself as the victim. I felt like I was living in some twisted game, where logic didn't apply. But what she didn't know was that I had one more piece of evidence she couldn't explain away. And I was saving it for the perfect moment, top of form, bottom of form. The HOA's emergency meeting was supposed to be about community integrity. But everyone in Maplewood Estates knew what it was really about. Me. I could feel the tension before I even walked into the clubhouse that night. Folding chairs were lined up in neat rows, neighbors whispering in tight clusters. Karen stood at the front of the room, in her usual pastel blazer, a stack of papers in her hand, her smile stretched so thin it looked painted on. The moment I entered, her voice rose just enough for everyone to hear. "Ah, Mr. Collins," she said sweetly. "So glad you could join us. We were just discussing your pattern of non-compliance." The way she said it, smug, rehearsed, made my blood boil. But I kept calm. I knew something she didn't. I had spent the last week quietly gathering everything. Every fine, every threat, every photo of her creeping around my property. More importantly, I had the footage. The one piece of evidence that would shatter her perfect image. Karen launched into her speech, parading her authority like a badge of honor. "It's come to our attention," she said, "that certain homeowners have been conducting surveillance on their neighbors, violating our community's privacy policies." She looked directly at me, as murmurs spread through the room. "This kind of behavior creates hostility," she continued, "and it's not representative of Maplewood values." The hypocrisy was staggering. I could see my neighbors' eyes darting between us. Some skeptical, others already convinced by her performance. I waited until she finished her well-practiced monologue before standing up. "Are you done?" I asked. The room went quiet. Karen tilted her head, feigning patience. "Go ahead," she said. "Would love to hear your side." I took a deep breath and pulled my phone from my pocket. "I think everyone here deserves to see the truth," I said, connecting my device to the projector cable that had been left on the table. The screen flickered to life, and within seconds, the footage began to play. The first video showed a shadowy figure creeping along my fence line. Flashlight in hand, gasps rippled through the room. Then came the close-up, Karen's unmistakable face, caught by the birdhouse camera, sprinkling something on the ground and looking around before hurrying away. The silence was deafening. You could practically hear the air leave the room. Karen's confident smile vanished, her face draining of color. "This is ridiculous," she stammered. You doctored this?" But I wasn't done. I played the second clip. The police officer arriving at her house 2 days later, footage from my porch cam. Her frantic body language, her denial, her face when the officer handed her the evidence bag I'd given them. "They found traces of rodenticide on your property, Mrs. Walters," the officer said in the recording. "Care to explain?" The room erupted in whispers. Some people turned away, others stared at her in disbelief. One of the board members, her closest ally, stood up and muttered, "Karen, is this true?" She didn't answer. Her hands trembled as she fumbled with her papers, trying to find something, anything, to regain control. But it was over. "You wanted to talk about community integrity," I said, my voice steady now. "Let's talk about how you tried to poison my dog." Her eyes snapped up at me, wide and desperate. "That's not what happened," she barked. "You can't prove intent?" But the damage was done. Every person in that room had seen it with their own eyes. The whispers turned to angry murmurs. "That's sick," someone muttered. "What kind of person does that?" Another said. Karen's veneer of power crumbled right there in front of everyone. The woman who'd once controlled this neighborhood with fear now looked small, cornered, and terrified. She tried to speak again, but her voice cracked. "You people don't understand," she began, but one of her own board members cut her off. "I think you should step down, Karen." That moment, seeing her authority dissolve in real time, was surreal. For months, she'd ruled this place like a petty dictator, using rules and fines to control everyone. Now, she couldn't even look me in the eye. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sadness. This had never been what I wanted. I just wanted to live peacefully, to walk my dog without fear. But Karen had crossed a line, and once she did, there was no turning back. The meeting ended in chaos. People shouting, papers flying. The board hastily adjourning the session. Karen stormed out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. I stood there for a long moment, the projector screen still glowing with her frozen image. When I finally stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a wave of relief. Neighbors who had once avoided me now approached quietly, offering sympathetic nods or whispered apologies. One older man, who'd lived there for decades, said softly, "We all knew something was off about her. None of us had the courage to say it." That line stuck with me. For all her talk about community, Karen had ruled through intimidation. And we had all let it happen. But the story didn't end there. 2 days later, I received a letter from the HOA's legal counsel. Karen had resigned, citing health reasons, but the investigation into her conduct had expanded. Several residents had come forward with their own complaints. Fines for imaginary violations, threats, even reports of her entering properties without consent. The HOA board voted unanimously to overturn every fine she'd issued and to implement new transparency rules for all enforcement actions. It was poetic justice. Still, I couldn't shake the image of her face when the footage played. The moment she realized her power was gone. The climax of it all came when local news picked up the story. A segment aired about a small town HOA scandal, featuring interviews with residents, faces blurred, names withheld. Watching it from my living room, Max curled up at my feet, I felt a wave of closure I hadn't known I needed. Karen's name wasn't mentioned, but everyone in Maplewood Estates knew who it was. Not long after, her house went up for sale. She moved out quietly, without so much as a goodbye. The "for sale" sign stood for months, a silent reminder of what unchecked power and obsession could destroy. As I stood by my fence one evening, looking across the now quiet street, I noticed the patch of dirt where she used to scatter poison. It was bare, lifeless, but symbolic. It reminded me that even the most controlling people can't hide forever behind titles and rules. When you shine light on the truth, it burns through the facade. Karen had gone too far, and in doing so, she'd exposed herself completely. Still, even with her gone, the neighborhood didn't feel the same. There was a strange quiet, the kind that follows a storm. People mowed their lawns and waved politely, but you could sense the caution. Like we'd all learned just how fragile normal could be. I didn't blame them. We'd seen what one person's obsession could do. As I walked Max down the street that evening, the air heavy with that post-rain freshness, I glanced at the homes around me. Identical facades, perfect hedges, the illusion of peace. For the first time, I realized how easily it could all unravel. Karen had tried to destroy what made this place feel like home. Instead, she'd revealed its truth. Power isn't in the rules, it's in how we treat each other. And the moment you forget that, you lose everything. And though she was gone, one thought kept echoing in my mind. If someone like her could rise to power here, how many other neighborhoods are living the same quiet nightmare? Just waiting for someone to stand up and expose it. In the weeks that followed Karen's downfall, the neighborhood went through an eerie transformation. For the first time since we'd moved in, Maplewood Estates was quiet. Not the pleasant, suburban kind of quiet, but the kind that hums with aftermath. People started coming out of their houses again, cautiously at first. The same neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid me now stopped to chat during walks with Max. It was strange how quickly the fear that had held everyone in place began to dissolve once Karen was gone. It was like the entire neighborhood exhaled a breath it didn't realize it had been holding. Still, the damage she'd done lingered. Not just in the overgrown hedges and peeling paint of neglected houses, but in the way people spoke about her, always in hushed tones, like saying her name might summon the nightmare back. The HOA board, stripped of its self-appointed queen, scrambled to repair its image. They held open meetings for the first time in years, invited residents to vote on policy changes, and even issued a public apology for any distress caused by prior administrative actions. It was more than I expected, but less than what was owed. Too many people had been fined, bullied, or shamed into silence. Some even sold their homes just to escape. It wasn't until Karen's behavior made the news that the community truly woke up to how toxic the system had become. Watching her influence vanish was satisfying. But it also forced everyone, including me, to face a painful truth. We'd all let it happen. We'd mistaken compliance for peace. Time moved on. The HOA became almost unrecognizable. No more threats, no more fear. Just people working together to make things better. The fences still stood, the lawns still glistened in the sun, but something deeper had changed. There was honesty now and accountability. Maplewood had learned that community isn't about control. It's about trust, and trust can't be enforced with fines or threats. It's earned, one choice at a time. I still think about that night at the meeting. The look in Karen's eyes when she realized she'd lost everything. It wasn't just fear. It was the shock of facing truth. For years, she'd hidden behind power, behind bylaws and authority, but when the mask fell, she was just another neighbor. Flawed, fragile, and human. Maybe that's the biggest lesson of all. The lines between hero and villain in these stories are thinner than we like to admit. We all crave control, safety, belonging. But when those desires turn into obsession, the community we think we're protecting becomes the very thing we destroy. Today, when people ask me what happened in Maplewood, I don't talk about the poison or the footage or the police. I tell them about the fence. About how it once divided me from my neighbors. And now it stands as a reminder that boundaries can protect, but they can also isolate. I tell them that peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the courage to face it head on. As the seasons changed and the flowers bloomed again, Max and I reclaimed our little piece of normal. Every morning we walked past the spot where Karen once stood with her notebook, judging every imperfection. Now it's just another patch of grass, unremarkable, ordinary. And that's exactly how I like it. Sometimes when I see a new family moving in, excited and hopeful, I smile and wave. Just like people once did for us. And I silently hope they never have to learn the hard way what I did. That even the most beautiful neighborhoods can turn ugly when fear wears the mask of order. And yet, despite everything, I wouldn't change what happened. Because it taught me the value of standing up. Not just for myself, but for what's right. It taught me that justice doesn't always roar, sometimes it unfolds quietly, one truth at a time. Most of all, it taught me that even when your world feels poisoned by someone else's hate, there's always a way to take your power back. So, if you ever find yourself staring down a Karen of your own, someone who uses rules to break people instead of build them, Remember this. The moment they cross the line, they've already started to lose. Because truth doesn't need authority to win. It just needs someone brave enough to show it.